The ink stain on Natalie Graham's fingers had been there so long it looked like a birthmark. A dark shadow that marked her as surely as any brand marked cattle in the dusty territory of Arizona in 1884. She sat in her small shop on the main street of Clifton Hill, a copper mining town nestled in the rugged eastern mountains of the Arizona Territory, her quill moving across parchment with the kind of precision that made men stop and stare through her window. The sign above her door read Graham Calligraphy and Fine Writing, in letters so elegant they seemed to dance even when standing still. Natalie had arrived in Clifton Hill 6 months ago from Boston, carrying nothing but a trunk full of supplies, a broken engagement, and the desperate need to start over somewhere no one knew her name or her shame. The door opened with a jingle of the small bell she had hung there, and Natalie looked up to see a man who seemed to fill the entire frame. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of the sky just before a storm. His hat was worn but clean, his boots dusty from riding and his hands rough with calluses. He held his hat against his chest with an awkward politeness that seemed at odds with his powerful build. "Madam," he said, his voice low and uncertain, "I heard you write things, beautiful things." Natalie set down her quill and straightened in her chair. She was 23 years old, and in the 6 months since arriving in Clifton Hill, she had written birth announcements, death notices, business contracts, and love letters for miners who could barely scratch their own names in the dirt. But something about this man made her heart beat faster, though she could not say why. "I do calligraphy, yes. What do you need written?" The man stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. There was a gentleness in his eyes that surprised her, given his rough appearance. "My name is Parker Nash. I work the Triple Bar Ranch about 10 miles south of town. I'm getting married in 3 weeks and I need someone to write our wedding vows." He paused, looking down at his hat. "I want them to be beautiful. My betrothed, she deserves beautiful words." Something cold settled in Natalie's stomach, though she forced a professional smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Nash. I would be happy to help. Do you have the words already, or do you need help composing them as well?" Parker looked up at her then, and she saw real vulnerability in his face. "I cannot read or write, miss. I know what I want to say in my heart, but I do not have the education to make it sound right. I was hoping you could help me find the words." Natalie had helped many illiterate clients, and she felt no judgment toward them. Education was a luxury many could not afford, especially on the frontier. "Of course. Please sit down." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me about your betrothed. What do you want her to know?" Parker sat, his large frame making the delicate chair seem like a child's toy. He twisted his hat in his hands, thinking. "Her name is Caroline. We have been engaged for 6 months. She came out here from Missouri with her family and her father works at the mine. She is a good woman, practical. She will make a fine wife." Natalie dipped her quill in ink, preparing to take notes. "And what do you want to promise her? To provide for her, to protect her, to be a good husband?" His words were simple, honest, but there was something missing in them. Natalie had written enough love letters to recognize passion, and she heard none in Parker Nash's voice. "You love her?" The question slipped out before Natalie could stop herself, far too personal and none of her business. Parker looked startled. "I care for her. She will be a good partner." "Love is not always necessary for a good marriage, Miss Graham." Natalie felt a pang of something she could not quite name. "Perhaps not, but beautiful vows should speak of more than duty, Mr. Nash. They should speak of hope, of dreams, of the life you want to build together." "Tell me what you hope your marriage will be." For the next hour, Natalie drew words from Parker Nash like water from a reluctant well. She learned that he had come to Arizona 5 years ago after his family lost their farm in Texas to drought and debt. He had worked his way up from a hired hand to the foreman of the Triple Bar Ranch. He was 28 years old and had never been married. He wanted children someday, a house of his own, land that belonged to him. Caroline was the daughter of his employer's friend, a suitable match that had been gently encouraged by both families. As Parker spoke, Natalie wrote, transforming his halting words into flowing script. But she also watched him, noting the way he looked out her window toward the mountains, the way his voice grew animated only when he spoke of the land and the horses, the way he never once mentioned anything specific about Caroline beyond her practical virtues. "Come back in 3 days," Natalie finally said. "I will have a draft of the vows for you to hear. We can make changes until they are perfect." Parker stood, reaching into his pocket. "What do I owe you? We can settle the bill when the work is finished. I charge based on the final product." He nodded, placing his hat back on his head. At the door, he paused. "Thank you, Miss Graham. I have heard people talk about your work. They say you can make words do things, make them sing. Caroline deserves words that sing." After he left, Natalie sat staring at the notes she had taken. She should have felt nothing but professional interest in the job. Instead, she felt a strange melancholy, a sense of waste. Here was a man agreeing to marry a woman he spoke of like she was a sensible purchase, and a woman presumably doing the same. It reminded her too much of her own failed engagement in Boston, where duty and social expectation had nearly trapped her in a loveless marriage. That evening, in her small room above the shop, Natalie began to write Parker Nash's wedding vows. She crafted promises of partnership and respect, of building a life together on the hard Arizona soil, of facing whatever challenges came with united strength. They were beautiful words, elegant and touching. They were also completely hollow, and Natalie knew it. When Parker returned 3 days later, she read the vows aloud to him. He listened intently, his expression serious. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Those are fine words," he said finally. "Real fine, but they do not sound like me." Natalie set down the paper. "What do you mean? They sound like something from a book. Caroline would know I did not think of those words myself. I do not want to start our marriage with a lie, even a pretty one." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Can you make them sound more like something a ranch hand would say? Keep the beauty, but make them sound true." It was the most insightful thing anyone had ever said to Natalie about her work. She found herself smiling. "Yes, I can do that, but I need to understand you better, Mr. Nash. The words need to reflect who you really are." "Then maybe we should talk more," Parker said. "Could I buy you lunch, Miss Graham? We could talk, and you could ask me whatever you need to know." Natalie knew she should refuse. It was inappropriate, and he was engaged to another woman. But she told herself it was for the work, to better serve her client. That would be helpful, yes. They walked to the small restaurant 2 doors down, a simple place run by a Chinese family that served good food at fair prices. Over plates of beef and potatoes, Parker talked and Natalie listened. She learned that he had been 8 years old when he first sat on a horse, that his mother had died of fever when he was 15, that his father had drunk himself to death 2 years later. She learned that he could track a steer across solid rock, that he had once set his own broken arm because the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away, that he sent most of his wages back to his younger sister in Texas, who was raising 3 children alone after her husband abandoned her. "You are a good brother," Natalie said softly. Parker shrugged. "Family is all we have out here. Have to take care of each other." "Tell me about what you love," Natalie said, her notebook open on the table beside her plate. Not what you think you should love, but what truly moves your heart. Parker looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. That is a dangerous question, Miss Graham. Humor me. It is for the vows. He looked out the window at the dusty street. I love the moment just after sunrise when the whole desert seems to catch fire with light. I love the feeling of a good horse under me, when we move together like we are one creature. I love watching thunderstorms roll across the mountains, all that power and beauty. I love sitting by a campfire under stars so thick they look like spilled salt, feeling so small and so much a part of something bigger at the same time. He looked back at her. Those are the things that move my heart, Miss Graham, but I cannot put those in wedding vows. Why not? Because Caroline thinks camping is uncomfortable and horses are just transportation. She wants a house in town someday, with a fence and a garden. She wants me to move up, maybe become a mine supervisor like her father. There is nothing wrong with wanting those things, but they are not the things I love. Natalie set down her fork. Mr. Nash, why are you marrying her? The question hung between them, too bold and too honest. Parker was quiet for a long time. Because I am 28 years old and it is time to settle down. Because she is a good woman who will not complain about the hard life out here. Because her father can help me get ahead. Because everyone says we are a good match. He met her eyes. Because I thought those were good enough reasons. Thought, he stood abruptly, pulling money from his pocket and setting it on the table. I should go. I am sorry to waste your time, Miss Graham. I do not think I need those vows written after all. He was out the door before Natalie could respond. She sat alone at the table, her heart pounding, wondering what had just happened and why she felt like she had broken something precious. For 3 days, Natalie heard nothing from Parker Nash. She told herself it was for the best, that he was clearly having doubts about his engagement and it was better to resolve them without her involvement. She tried to focus on her other work, writing careful copies of mining contracts and ornate certificates of incorporation for new businesses. But her mind kept returning to the cowboy with sad eyes who loved desert sunrises and stars that looked like spilled salt. On the 4th day, Parker appeared at her door again. He looked like he had not slept well, and there was a tightness around his mouth that suggested difficult decisions. I broke my engagement, he said without preamble. It was not fair to Caroline, making promises I was not sure I could keep. She deserves someone who loves her fully, not someone marrying her because it seems like the practical thing to do. Natalie stood from her desk, her heart in her throat. Is she all right? Angry, hurt, but I think also a little relieved. We were both doing what we thought we should do, not what we wanted to do. He stepped further into the shop. I owe you for your work on the vows, even though I will not be using them. You do not owe me anything. I had not finished them to my satisfaction anyway. Parker moved closer to her desk. That is not true, Miss Graham. I owe you quite a lot. You asked me questions that made me realize I was about to make a terrible mistake. You made me think about what I really want, not just what I think I should want. What do you want, Mr. Nash? He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, and Natalie felt like the air had been pulled from the room. That is a complicated question, but I know what I do not want anymore. I do not want to live a life that feels like a lie. I do not want to promise things I do not feel. I do not want to settle for practical when there might be something more. They stood looking at each other across the small shop, and Natalie felt the world tilt slightly. She barely knew this man, had spent perhaps 3 hours total in his company, but something in her recognized something in him. A similar loneliness. A similar hunger for a life that meant more than just surviving. I should not be here, Parker said quietly. People will talk, me coming to see you so soon after breaking my engagement. But I needed you to know that what you did, helping me see clearly, that was a gift. Thank you." After he left, Natalie sat at her desk and pressed her ink-stained fingers to her lips, trying to calm her racing heart. This was foolishness. She had come to Clifton Hill to escape romantic entanglements, not to find new ones. Parker Nash was a ranch foreman who could barely read, a man with no prospects beyond hard labor and a dangerous life. She was an educated woman from Boston with a business of her own. They made no sense together, but her heart, traitorous thing that it was, did not care about sense. Over the next 2 weeks, Parker found reasons to come to town. He needed a contract drawn up between him and a rancher who wanted to buy some horses. He needed a letter written to his sister in Texas. He needed advice on what kind of books a man should read if he wanted to improve himself. Each visit lasted longer than the last, with more conversation and less business. They talked about everything, from their childhoods to their dreams for the future, from philosophy to politics to the best way to break a stubborn horse. Natalie learned that Parker was funny, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. He was also surprisingly well-informed, despite his lack of formal education, picking up knowledge from conversations and keen observation. He had a natural intelligence that formal schooling could not teach, and a kindness that seemed innate to his character. Parker, in turn, learned that Natalie had fled Boston after her fiancé had expected her to give up her passion for calligraphy and become a dutiful society wife who spent her days making social calls and planning dinner parties. She had broken the engagement and scandalized her family by leaving alone for the frontier, determined to make her own way. She was lonely sometimes, but she did not regret her choice. "You were brave," Parker said one afternoon as they sat in her shop, the closed sign on the door because she had given up pretending these visits were purely professional. "Leaving everything you knew for something uncertain or foolish," Natalie said. "My family certainly thinks so. They have not written to me since I left. Then they are the foolish ones. You built something here, made a place for yourself. That takes courage." Natalie looked down at her hands, perpetually stained with ink. "Sometimes I wonder if I ran away from something or toward something. Maybe both. Maybe that is all right." The afternoon sun slanted through her window, turning the dust motes into gold. Parker sat in the chair across from her desk, his long legs stretched out, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. There was something building between them, something neither of them had named but both clearly felt. "People are talking," Natalie said quietly, "about you coming here so often. I know, does it bother you? It should. I came here to build a respectable business, and being associated with a man who just broke his engagement could damage my reputation. Then I will stop coming." "I did not say that is what I wanted." Natalie met his eyes. "I said it should bother me." "But it does not as much as I thought it would." Parker leaned forward. "What are we doing, Natalie?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent a thrill through her. "I do not know. I think about you all the time. When I am working, when I am trying to sleep, when I am supposed to be paying attention to something else. I think about the way you hold your quill, the way you get a little line between your eyebrows when you are concentrating. I think about how you listen, really listen, like what people say matters to you. I think about how brave you are, how you built this life for yourself." He paused. "I am saying this all wrong. You are the one who is good with words, not me." Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "You are saying it just fine." "Am I? Because what I am trying to say is that I am falling in love with you, and I do not know if that is something you want to hear or something that will send you running back to Boston." The shop was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a wagon rattled past. Someone called out a greeting. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary day in Clifton Hill, while inside this small room, everything was changing. "I am not going back to Boston," Natalie said softly. "And that is not something I do not want to hear." Parker stood and moved around the desk. He reached down and took her ink-stained hands in his calloused ones, a perfect fit of different worlds. "Then let me court you properly. Let me take you to dinner, for rides in the desert, to dances and church socials. Let me show everyone in this town that I am serious about you. People will say we are moving too fast, that you just ended one engagement. Let them say whatever they want. I wasted enough time in a relationship that was not right. Now I found something that is right, and I am not wasting another moment." He pulled her to her feet, and they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Tell me you feel it too. Tell me I am not alone in this." "You are not alone," Natalie whispered. "I feel it too. It terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure." Parker raised one of her hands to his lips and kissed her ink-stained fingers. "Then let us be terrified and thrilled together." Their courtship became the talk of Clifton Hill. Some people clucked their tongues and said Parker Nash had behaved badly, breaking one engagement and immediately pursuing another woman. Others said Caroline had been lucky to escape marriage to a man who clearly did not love her, and that Miss Graham and Mr. Nash were obviously meant for each other. Anyone could see it in the way they looked at one another. Parker took Natalie riding in the desert, showing her the places he loved, the hidden canyons and secret springs, the vistas that made her understand why he could never be happy trapped in an office. She rode astride rather than side saddle, another scandal for the town gossips, her skirts hiked up practically, and her hair coming loose from its pins. Parker taught her to read the land, to see the stories written in tracks and bent grass, to feel the beauty in the harsh landscape. Natalie taught Parker to read. They started with simple primers, and she discovered he was a quick student, his mind hungry for knowledge. He was self-conscious at first, stumbling over words, but she was patient and encouraging. Within weeks, he could read simple passages, and the pride in his eyes when he finished his first complete story made her fall even deeper in love with him. They talked endlessly, discovering each other's histories and dreams. Parker told her about growing up poor in Texas, about watching his father slowly destroy himself with alcohol and bitterness, about the day he decided to head west and make something of himself. Natalie told him about her suffocating life in Boston society, about her mother's disappointment that she preferred her calligraphy to social climbing, about the moment she realized she would rather be alone and free than married and trapped. "You ever regret it?" Parker asked one evening as they sat on the porch of her shop, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Leaving your family, your home, everything you knew. Sometimes I miss my younger brother. He was the only one who understood why I had to leave. But regret? No. If I had stayed, I would have spent my whole life wondering what I could have been." She looked at him. "Do you regret breaking your engagement?" "Not for a single second. Caroline is already being courted by the new assayer at the mine, and she seems happy. We would have made each other miserable." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Finding you, Natalie, that was worth any amount of gossip or disapproval." 3 months after Parker had first walked into her shop, he asked her to marry him. They were riding back from a day spent at a beautiful canyon he had wanted to show her, the sunset painting the rocks in shades of orange and red. He pulled his horse to a stop and turned to her, suddenly serious. "I do not have a ring yet, and this is not a fancy restaurant or a planned romantic moment, but I cannot wait another day to ask you. Natalie Graham, will you marry me?" Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Parker dismounted and pulled her from her horse into his arms, kissing her with all the passion they had been holding back during their careful courtship. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want you to have a beautiful wedding with all the proper traditions. And I want you to write our vows. That is how this all started, with me asking you to write vows for a marriage that would have been all wrong. Now I want you to write the vows for a marriage that is perfectly right." Natalie laughed and cried at the same time. "I already know what they will say. Do you? I will promise to love you with all my wild, impractical heart, to build a life with you that is true rather than proper, to face every adventure and hardship by your side, to never stop discovering who you are and who we are together." She cupped his face in her hands. "And I will promise that every word I write for the rest of my life will be written with the understanding of what real love feels like because of you." Parker kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "I do not have your gift for words, but I will promise to love you exactly as you are, to support your dreams and never ask you to be less than everything you want to be, to show you all the beauty in this wild land and discover new beauty every day in loving you, to be the kind of man worthy of the gift you are giving me." They stood in the desert as the sun sank below the horizon, holding each other and planning their future. They would marry in 6 weeks, giving them time to plan a proper wedding and for Parker to save money for rings, and a small house in town where Natalie could continue her calligraphy business while being closer to the ranch where Parker worked. The next weeks were a flurry of activity. Natalie designed and wrote their wedding invitations, elegant cards that were works of art. She carefully composed their vows, crafting words that reflected both their personalities and their love. Parker worked extra hours to save money, and Natalie took on additional commissions to build up her business savings. They faced some opposition. Caroline's father, still angry about the broken engagement, tried to get Parker fired from the Triple Bar Ranch. But the ranch owner, a fair man who had watched Parker work hard for 5 years, refused to let him go. Some of the society ladies in town snubbed Natalie, considering her an interloper and a home wrecker. Never mind that Caroline had not actually been married yet, but they also found support. The Chinese family who ran the restaurant became good friends, happy to see two people who treated them with respect and kindness finding happiness together. The ranch hands threw Parker a rowdy party to celebrate his engagement, and several miners' wives commissioned Natalie to write letters home to their families, wanting to support her business. One afternoon, 3 weeks before the wedding, a woman knocked on Natalie's door. She was perhaps 30 years old, plainly dressed, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. "Miss Graham, I am Alice Porter. I work at the boarding house on 3rd Street. How can I help you, Miss Porter?" Alice hesitated, then stepped inside. "I heard you are marrying Parker Nash. I wanted to meet you before the wedding, to tell you something about the man you are marrying." Natalie felt her stomach drop. "Go on." 3 years ago, I came to Clifton Hill running from a bad situation. I had a young son and no money and nowhere to go. I was desperate, about to do desperate things to survive. Parker found me on the street, crying, my boy hungry and scared. He gave me every cent he had in his pockets. Then he went to the boarding house owner and convinced her to give me a job in exchange for a room. He paid our rent for 3 months until I could afford it myself. Alice's eyes filled with tears. He saved our lives, Miss Graham, and he never asked for anything in return, never told anyone what he had done. I only know because the boarding house owner told me last week that he is getting married, and I wanted you to know what kind of man you are marrying. After Alice left, Natalie sat at her desk and cried, not from sadness, but from overwhelming love for the man who was about to become her husband. That evening, when Parker came to town, she threw her arms around him and told him what Alice had said. Parker looked embarrassed. It was not anything special. She needed help and I could give it. It was everything special. It shows who you are, Parker Nash. And I love you more than words can express, even with all my skill at words. The day before their wedding, Natalie's younger brother Thomas arrived on the afternoon stage. He was 20 years old, with the same dark hair and green eyes as Natalie. She had not seen him in over a year, and she nearly knocked him over with her enthusiastic embrace. "Mother and father do not know I am here," Thomas said. "They would be furious if they knew. But you are my sister, and I could not miss your wedding." He looked around at her small shop with obvious pride. "You did it, Natalie. You really built something here. Come meet Parker," Natalie said, grabbing his arm. "You are going to love him." Thomas did love Parker, or at least respected him immensely. The two men sized each other up carefully, then shook hands with obvious mutual approval. That evening, the three of them had dinner together, and Thomas told stories about Natalie's childhood that made Parker laugh until tears ran down his face. She was always getting into trouble for reading when she was supposed to be practicing her embroidery or learning to play the piano, Thomas said. Mother despaired of ever making her into a proper lady. "Thank God she failed," Parker said, reaching for Natalie's hand across the table. "A proper lady would never have come to Arizona alone. I would never have met her." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful. Natalie woke early in her small room above the shop, too excited and nervous to sleep. Today she would marry Parker Nash, the rough-handed cowboy who had walked into her shop looking for beautiful words and found something neither of them had expected. She dressed carefully in her wedding gown, a beautiful cream silk dress she had brought from Boston for some imagined future occasion. It seemed fitting to wear it today, a symbol of bringing her old life into her new one. She arranged her dark hair in an intricate style, leaving a few tendrils loose to soften the look, and pinned a small spray of wildflowers Parker had brought her from the desert. The wedding was held in the small church at the edge of town, with the preacher who served the community. About 50 people attended, a mix of townspeople, ranch hands from the Triple Bar, and mining families who had become Natalie's clients and friends. Caroline was not there, of course, but Natalie had sent her an invitation anyway, a gesture of goodwill that went unanswered. Thomas walked Natalie down the aisle, and she saw Parker standing at the front of the church looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. He wore a new suit, his first ever, and his hair was neatly combed. But it was the expression on his face when he saw her that made her heart soar. Pure love, undisguised and overwhelming. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They had decided to read their own vows rather than use traditional ones, wanting their promises to be as unique as their love. When the preacher nodded to Parker, he pulled a carefully folded paper from his pocket. His hands shook slightly as he unfolded it. "Natalie, when I walked into your shop 6 months ago, I thought I was looking for words to make a practical marriage sound romantic. Instead, I found something I did not even know I was missing. I found someone who saw me, really saw me, and loved what she saw. You make me want to be a better man. You make me believe in a life that is more than just getting by. You make me understand what all those love songs are really about." He looked up from the paper, his eyes shining. "I promise to love you with everything I am and everything I will become. I promise to support your dreams and celebrate your talents. I promise to show you every beautiful thing this wild land has to offer, and to discover new beauty every day in your eyes. I promise to read to you every night, getting better at it because you believe I can. I promise to never stop talking to you, learning from you, falling deeper in love with you." His voice cracked slightly. You wrote the words for me, but the feelings are all mine." Natalie was crying before he finished. When it was her turn, she did not need to look at her paper. She had memorized every word. "Parker, you taught me that beautiful words mean nothing without honest feelings behind them. You taught me that love is not about finding someone perfect, but finding someone perfect for you. You taught me that the bravest thing we can do is be completely ourselves and hope someone loves us anyway. And you love me anyway." She smiled through her tears. "I promise to love you with all my wild, impractical heart. I promise to write the story of our life together, not with ink on paper, but with choices and actions and devotion. I promise to be your partner in every adventure, your comfort in every hardship, your home wherever we are. I promise to never stop learning who you are, because I think discovering you will take a lifetime, and I cannot wait for every moment of it." When the preacher pronounced them married, Parker kissed her with such joy and passion that several people in the crowd whistled and hooted. Natalie kissed him back, not caring who saw or what anyone thought, knowing only that this moment was the beginning of everything she had hoped for. The reception was held at the restaurant where Parker had bought her lunch that first day, the owners having offered their space as a wedding gift. There was food and music and dancing. Parker, who claimed he had no skill at dancing, held Natalie in his arms and moved with her around the small floor with surprising grace. "You lied about not knowing how to dance," Natalie accused, laughing up at him. "I never said I did not know how. I said I had no skill at it. There is a difference, but I would dance every night for the rest of my life if it meant holding you like this." As the evening wore on, Thomas gave a toast that made both Natalie and Parker cry. Alice Porter from the boarding house brought her son to meet Natalie, the boy shyly offering her a drawing he had made of horses as a wedding gift. The ranch hands from the Triple Bar presented Parker with a beautifully tooled saddle they had all chipped in to buy. The Chinese restaurant owners gave them a set of dishes painted with delicate flowers. Late in the evening, as the party was winding down, Parker leaned close to Natalie's ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Nash?" Natalie loved the sound of her new name. "Yes, Mr. Nash, I am ready." They had rented a small house on the edge of town, close enough for Natalie to walk to her shop but with a view of the open desert that Parker loved. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Parker carried Natalie over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in their small parlor. "I have something for you," Parker said. He led her to a corner of the room where a beautiful wooden desk sat, much finer than the one in her shop. "I made it myself." "Well, with help from the ranch carpenter. But I did most of it. I wanted you to have a place to write at home, somewhere beautiful and just for you." Natalie ran her hands over the smooth wood, seeing the care in every joint and curve. "It is perfect, but you already gave me the best gift possible." "What is that? This life. A love that is true instead of proper." She turned to him, her beautiful dress rustling. "I never knew I could be this happy." Parker pulled her close, and they stood in their small house, holding each other, beginning their married life with the same honesty and passion that had characterized their courtship. That night, they made love for the first time, a tender and profound joining that left them both breathless and amazed at the intimacy they had created. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and make decisions together, but every challenge only seemed to deepen their bond. Natalie continued her calligraphy business, which thrived as more people came to appreciate her talent. Parker continued working at the Triple Bar, saving money toward his dream of buying land of their own someday. They established routines and rituals. Every evening, Parker would come home, and they would have dinner together. then spend an hour with him reading aloud while Natalie did needlework or sketched designs for new calligraphy projects. His reading improved rapidly, and soon he was tackling books that would have seemed impossible just months before. On Sundays, they would ride out into the desert, packing a lunch and spending the day exploring. Natalie brought her sketchbook and drew the landscape, while Parker taught her more about the plants and animals they encountered. 6 months into their marriage, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She told Parker one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. Parker went very still, then turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "Truly, truly. In about 6 months, if my calculations are correct." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We are going to have a child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child, a person who is part you and part me." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, yes, but happier than I have ever been." They told Thomas first, writing him a letter that Natalie composed with particular care. He wrote back with such enthusiasm that Natalie cried reading his response. He promised to visit as soon as the baby was born and to stand as godfather if they would have him. The pregnancy was not easy. Natalie was often sick in the early months, and the Arizona heat became oppressive as her belly grew. But Parker was attentive and caring, taking over the harder tasks around their home, bringing her cool drinks and fanning her on the hottest afternoons. The ranch owner's wife, a kind woman who had delivered 4 babies of her own, befriended Natalie and gave her advice and reassurance. Natalie continued working almost until the end, only stopping when she could no longer sit comfortably at her desk for long periods. She had saved enough money that they could manage for a few months without her income, and Parker had gotten a raise that helped ease their financial concerns. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1886, after a labor that lasted 18 hours and left Natalie exhausted but exhilarated. Parker held her hand through all of it, never leaving her side despite the midwife's suggestions that he might be more comfortable waiting elsewhere. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Parker cut the cord with shaking hands and then burst into tears. "He is perfect," Parker said, holding his son for the first time. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Parker Nash after Natalie's brother and his father. Little Thomas had Parker's dark hair and Natalie's green eyes, and from the moment they laid eyes on him, both parents were completely besotted. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Natalie learned to nurse the baby while writing with her free hand, unwilling to give up her work completely. Parker learned to change diapers and soothe a crying infant with the same patience he used to gentle a skittish horse. They took turns walking the floor on sleepless nights, supporting each other through the challenges of caring for a newborn. Thomas Jr., as they called him to differentiate him from Uncle Thomas, was a happy baby who loved being held and sung to. Parker would carry him around their small house, telling him stories about horses and cattle and the desert. Natalie would read to him from books, knowing he could not understand but wanting him to grow up surrounded by words and stories. When Thomas Jr. was 3 months old, Uncle Thomas arrived for a visit. He had graduated from university and was preparing to start a teaching position in Colorado. He stayed for 2 weeks, spending hours with his nephew and helping Parker build an addition onto their house, a proper nursery for the baby. "You look happy, Natalie," Thomas said one afternoon as they sat on the porch, watching Parker walk around the yard with the baby in his arms. "Really, truly happy. I am, more than I ever imagined I could be. Mother asks about you sometimes. Not directly, but she asks me questions when Father is not around." Does she? I think she regrets the way things ended between you. She is too proud to admit it, but I think she misses you. Natalie watched her husband and son, her heart full. Maybe someday we can reconcile, but for now I am content with the family I have built here. As Thomas Jr. grew, so did Parker and Natalie's love for each other and their life together. Parker was promoted to assistant manager of the Triple Bar Ranch, with a salary that allowed them to save more aggressively toward buying their own land. Natalie's calligraphy business continued to thrive, and she began teaching classes in penmanship to the children in town, enjoying the opportunity to share her passion with others. They added to their house, building a proper office for Natalie and a larger bedroom for themselves. The house was still small and simple, but it was comfortable and full of love. On the mantel above their fireplace, Natalie had framed the vows they had written for their wedding, a daily reminder of the promises they had made and kept. When Thomas Jr. was 2 years old, Natalie became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Parker was again attentive and caring, while also managing the energy of a rambunctious toddler who was convinced the world existed for his entertainment. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1888, an easy birth that took only 6 hours. She had Natalie's dark hair and Parker's gray eyes, and they named her Rose Patricia Nash, after Parker's mother and Natalie's grandmother. Thomas Jr. was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and constantly asking when she would be old enough to play. With 2 children, life became even more hectic but no less joyful. Parker and Natalie worked together seamlessly, sharing duties and supporting each other through the challenges of raising a young family. They had little money for luxuries, but they had each other and their children, and that seemed like more than enough. One evening, when Thomas Jr. was 4 and Rose was 2, Parker came home with news that made their dreams suddenly real. The owner of the Triple Bar Ranch was retiring and selling off portions of the land. He had offered Parker first rights to a parcel of 200 acres at a price they could almost afford. "It would take every cent we have saved, plus a loan from the bank," Parker said, his excitement barely contained. "But it is good land with water and grass. We could run cattle, build a real ranch." "Let us do it," Natalie said without hesitation. "Let us build something that belongs to us." The next months were a whirlwind of activity. They secured the loan, purchased the land, and began the hard work of building their ranch. Parker designed a house, larger than their current one but still modest, with room for their growing family and a beautiful office for Natalie with windows overlooking the desert. They moved onto the property while the house was still being built, living in a temporary structure and working from dawn to dusk to establish their dream. The ranch hands from the Triple Bar helped with the construction, and Natalie's clients in town contributed in various ways, from providing meals to donating materials. The sense of community in Clifton Hill, which had once judged them harshly, now embraced them fully. They had proven themselves through years of hard work, devotion to each other, and kindness to others. The house was finished in the fall of 1889, a beautiful adobe structure with high ceilings and large windows, sturdy enough to withstand the harsh Arizona weather but elegant enough to showcase Natalie's refined tastes. She set up her calligraphy studio in the best room, with perfect lighting and space for all her supplies. Parker built corrals and a barn, started a small herd of cattle, and began making a name for himself as someone who could train horses better than anyone else in the territory. Thomas Jr. started school in Clifton Hill, riding to town each day with Natalie when she went to teach her calligraphy classes. Rose was a bright, curious child who loved following her father around the ranch, wanting to help with everything. The children grew up surrounded by love, hard work, and the stark beauty of the Arizona desert. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Parker surprised Natalie by presenting her with a leather-bound journal. Inside, on the first page, he had painstakingly written in his own hand, "The story of us," as written by Parker Nash, who learned to write so he could tell his wife how much he loves her. The rest of the pages were filled with his words, chronicling their meeting, courtship, and life together. The handwriting was careful and sometimes uncertain, the spelling not always perfect, but the love in every word was unmistakable. Natalie read the whole journal in one sitting, tears streaming down her face. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me," she said when she finished. "Not because the words are perfect, but because they are yours." "You gave me the gift of words," Parker said. "You taught me to read and write, but more than that, you taught me that words matter, that saying what you feel matters. I wanted to use that gift to tell you what you mean to me." They stood in their home, the one they had built together, with their children asleep down the hall and their whole life stretching out before them, and Natalie felt a sense of completeness she had never known was possible. The years passed, bringing both challenges and joys. There were droughts that tested their ranch, illnesses that scared them, financial struggles that required creativity and sacrifice. But through everything, Parker and Natalie faced life together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had 2 more children, another son and another daughter, expanding their family to 4 children who grew up strong and confident, raised with love and encouraged to pursue their dreams. Thomas Jr. developed his mother's love of learning and his father's skill with horses. Rose inherited her mother's artistic talents and her father's courage. The younger children, William and Sarah, were still finding their way but showed promise of their own unique gifts. Parker's horse training business grew, and he became known throughout the territory as someone who could handle even the most difficult animals. Natalie's calligraphy expanded beyond just writing services to creating art pieces that people commissioned for their homes. She began teaching at the school in Clifton Hill, helping shape a new generation's relationship with language and beauty. One afternoon, when they had been married for 12 years, Caroline appeared at their ranch. She was married herself now with 2 children, and she came to apologize. "I was bitter for a long time," she told Natalie and Parker as they sat on the porch. "But I see now that you did me a favor, Parker, by being honest about your feelings. I am married to a good man who loves me fully, and I love him the same way. I do not think either of us would have been happy together. I wanted to tell you that I have let go of my anger and to wish you well." It was a grace note that brought closure to an old wound, and both Parker and Natalie were grateful for it. They remained friendly acquaintances after that, not close friends but respectful neighbors in the small community. Through the years, Natalie reconnected slowly with her family in Boston. Her mother never fully forgave her for choosing her own path, but they exchanged letters occasionally, stilted and formal but at least communication. Her father remained distant, but Thomas wrote regularly and eventually visited every few years with his own growing family. Parker's sister in Texas visited once, bringing her children to meet their cousins. It was a joyful reunion, with Parker able to show her that he had made something of himself, that their parents' failures had not doomed them to similar fates. He sent money to help with her children's education, passing forward the gifts that Natalie had given him. As their children grew older, Parker and Natalie found themselves with more time together, rediscovering the connection that had first drawn them to each other. They went on long rides into the desert, talking about everything and nothing. They read books together in the evenings, discussing ideas and dreaming about the future. They made love with the same passion as their early days, their physical connection deepening along with their emotional bond. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from all over, celebrating the couple who had become pillars of the Clifton Hill community. Alice Porter, now running her own boarding house, gave a speech about Parker's kindness and Natalie's grace. The ranch hands told funny stories about Parker's early days learning the business. Natalie's students presented her with a book containing samples of calligraphy they had all created in her honor. As the sun set over the desert that evening, Parker and Natalie stood together watching their children play with their friends, their ranch thriving around them, their life full of love and purpose. "You ever regret it?" Parker asked, echoing a question from years before. "Leaving Boston, building this life instead of the one you were supposed to have?" Natalie leaned into him, feeling his strength and warmth. "Not for a single moment. This life, this love, these children, this home, it is all so much more than I ever imagined I could have. You gave me everything I did not know I wanted. You gave me everything I did not know I needed," Parker replied. "You taught me to see beauty, to value words, to believe I could be more than just a hired hand. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You gave me love." They stood together as the stars began to appear, the same stars that looked like spilled salt that Parker had described all those years ago. And Natalie thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a broken engagement and a simple request to write wedding vows to this moment of complete fulfillment. The years continued to pass, bringing both inevitable changes and enduring constants. Thomas Jr. went to university, encouraged by both parents to pursue his education. He studied veterinary medicine and returned to open a practice in Clifton Hill, serving the ranching community. Rose married a teacher and moved to Tucson but visited often. William took over more of the ranch operations as Parker grew older, showing a natural gift for the work. Sarah discovered a talent for music and studied in Phoenix, returning home to teach piano and voice in Clifton Hill. Parker and Natalie grew older together gracefully. Parker's hair turned silver, and his body showed the years of hard work, but his eyes remained the same storm gray, still looking at Natalie with wonder and love. Natalie's hands became more gnarled from years of holding a quill, but her penmanship remained exquisite, and she continued to create beauty with words. They became grandparents, with each of their children eventually giving them grandchildren to spoil and adore. The ranch house filled with the sounds of children playing, just as it had when their own were young. Parker taught his grandchildren to ride and to love the land. Natalie taught them to read and to appreciate the power of beautiful words. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Parker commissioned a stone mason to create a marker for their property. On it, in letters based on Natalie's calligraphy, were the words, "The Nash Ranch, established 1889, built on love, sustained by faith and enriched by family." "This is our legacy," Parker said as they stood before the marker. "Not just the land or the business, but what we built together. The love we shared, the children we raised, the life we created, that is what will endure." In the summer of 1920, when they had been married for 36 years, Parker suffered a heart attack while working with a young horse. He survived, but it was a warning that their time was finite. He was 64 years old, and Natalie was 59, and for the first time they had to confront the reality that their story would eventually end. "I am not ready," Natalie said one night as they lay in bed, holding each other close. "I am not ready to lose you." "You will never lose me," Parker said. "I am part of you now, just as you are part of me. And we have had a good life, Natalie. So many years of happiness. Not everyone gets what we have had." They made the most of the years they had left. Parker stepped back from the hardest ranch work, letting William take over while he focused on training horses and spending time with Natalie and their grandchildren. Natalie continued her calligraphy and teaching, but also made time for long conversations with Parker, recording his stories and memories for their family. Parker lived another 12 years after his heart attack, years filled with love and family, and the satisfaction of seeing what they had built continue to thrive. When he died peacefully in his sleep at age 76, with Natalie holding his hand, it felt like the end of an era, but also like the completion of something beautiful. Natalie grieved deeply, but not with despair. She had loved Parker Nash for 48 years, and she had the comfort of knowing their love had been real, deep, and transformative for both of them. She continued living on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, continuing her calligraphy work, and preserving Parker's memory through stories and the life they had built together. In her later years, Natalie began writing their story, using all her skill with words to capture what they had shared. She wrote about a cowboy who walked into a calligrapher's shop asking for beautiful words and found love instead. She wrote about building a life together in the harsh Arizona desert, about raising children and creating a legacy, about the daily small moments and the grand gestures that had made up their marriage. When Natalie died at age 87, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, the manuscript of their love story was found on her desk, completed just days before. Her last written words were, "We promised each other beautiful words, but we gave each other a beautiful life. And that, I think, was the greatest art we ever created together." The Nash family preserved the manuscript, along with the wedding vows that Natalie had written so long ago, and the journal that Parker had painstakingly filled with his own words of love. They remained on the ranch that Parker and Natalie had built, testament to a love that had started with a simple request for beautiful words, and had become a legacy that would endure for generations. Years later, when visitors came to the Nash Ranch, they would see the marker Parker had commissioned, and someone would always tell the story of the Boston calligrapher and the Arizona cowboy, who had loved each other so completely that they had transformed not just their own lives but the entire community around them. They would tell of how Parker had first come to Natalie to write vows for another woman, and instead had found his true match. They would speak of the home they built, the children they raised, the business they created, and the deep, abiding love that had sustained them through nearly 5 decades together. And in Clifton Hill, Arizona, in the calligraphy studio that had been preserved as part of the local historical society, visitors could still see examples of Natalie's beautiful work, including the wedding vows she had written for herself and Parker. The words remained as elegant and moving as the day she wrote them, a testament to the power of love expressed in beautiful language, and to two people who had promised each other everything and delivered on every word. The Nash family continued to thrive on the ranch that Parker and Natalie had established. Their children passed down the stories of their parents' love, ensuring that each new generation understood the foundation upon which their family had been built. The ranch itself became more than just a business. It became a symbol of what could be achieved through love, hard work, and unwavering partnership. Thomas Jr., the eldest, often told his own children about watching his parents work together, how they complemented each other perfectly. His father's practical strength combined with his mother's creative vision had created something neither could have achieved alone. Rose would speak of the gentleness in her father's hands, how the same hands that could break a horse could also tenderly brush her hair. William, who took over the main ranch operations, ran it with the same integrity and care his father had shown. Sarah's music students learned not just about notes and melodies, but about the poetry her mother had loved, the beauty of words set to song. The grandchildren grew up hearing about how their grandfather had been illiterate when he met their grandmother, and how love had motivated him to learn, to grow, to become more than he had thought possible. They learned that their grandmother had fled a life of empty privilege to find real purpose, and that she had discovered it not just in her art, but in loving a man who valued her for exactly who she was. In the town of Clifton Hill, the story of Parker and Natalie Nash became legend, told and retold until it became part of the town's identity. Young couples would sometimes visit Natalie's old shop, now a museum, and read the framed vows on the wall, using them as inspiration for their own marriages. The Chinese restaurant where Parker and Natalie had held their wedding reception remained in the same family, and they kept a photograph of the couple on the wall, honored customers who had treated them with respect and friendship when others had not. The Arizona Territory, which had been wild and rough when Parker and Natalie first met, changed dramatically over the decades. It became a state in 1912, saw 2 world wars, witnessed the transformation from horse-drawn wagons to automobiles, and eventually to airplanes. Through all these changes, the Nash Ranch remained, adapted and updated but still fundamentally the vision that Parker and Natalie had shared. The story of their love, written in Natalie's elegant hand and preserved by their family, was eventually published by a regional press, a small book that captured the hearts of readers who hungered for proof that true love was real and lasting. It was never a bestseller, but it sold steadily over the years, particularly to couples preparing for marriage who wanted to understand what real commitment looked like. The marker that Parker had commissioned remained standing on the ranch property, its words still clear despite decades of Arizona sun and wind. The Nash Ranch, established 1889, built on love, sustained by faith, and enriched by family. Visitors would often stop to photograph it, to touch the stone that represented such an enduring legacy. In the end, the story of the calligrapher and the cowboy was not about dramatic gestures or grand romance, though it had its share of both. It was about 2 people who found each other when neither was looking for love, who built a life together through daily choices to honor their promises, who created a family and a home that became a haven in a harsh land. It was about how beautiful words could lead to a beautiful life, and how love, when real and true, could transform everything it touched. The Nash family still gathers at the ranch for holidays and celebrations, now spanning 5 generations from Parker and Natalie. They tell the stories, show the photographs, read from the manuscript and the journal. They remember a calligrapher who had the courage to choose freedom over security, and a cowboy who had the wisdom to choose love over convenience. They honor a legacy that began with a simple request to write wedding vows, and became a love story that would inspire their family and their community for over a century. And somewhere, in the same desert where Parker once showed Natalie his favorite places, where stars still spill across the night sky like salt, where sunrises still set the landscape on fire with light, the spirit of their love endures. Not in any mystical sense, but in the very real impact they had on the world around them, in the family they created, in the lives they touched, and in the proof they provided that love, when true, really can conquer all and last forever. Their vows, written in Natalie's most beautiful calligraphy and preserved under glass, remain the heart of the family's collection of heirlooms. Every Nash bride and groom since Parker and Natalie has read those vows before their own weddings, drawing inspiration and courage from the promises made so long ago. The words speak across the decades, as fresh and powerful now as they were in 1884. I promise to love you with all my wild, impractical heart, to build a life with you that is true rather than proper, to face every adventure and hardship by your side, to never stop discovering who you are and who we are together. And Parker's response, carefully practiced and perfectly delivered. I promise to love you exactly as you are, to support your dreams and never ask you to be less than everything you want to be, to show you all the beauty in this wild land and discover new beauty every day in loving you, to be the kind of man worthy of the gift you are giving me. These were not just words they spoke on their wedding day. They were promises they kept every single day of their 48 years together. That faithfulness, that determination to honor their vows in action as well as words, was what made their love story legendary. The Nash Ranch continues to this day, now operated by Parker and Natalie's great-great-grandchildren, still in the same location, still bearing the same name. The house they built has been expanded and modernized, but the original adobe structure remains at its heart, carefully preserved. Natalie's studio, with its perfect lighting and view of the desert, is maintained exactly as she left it. A sacred space where family members go to write, to think, to remember. In Clifton Hill, Arizona, the Historical Society maintains exhibits about the town's colorful past, and the section about Parker and Natalie Nash is always the most visited. School children come on field trips to see Natalie's calligraphy and learn about the couple who exemplified the pioneering spirit. The Chinese restaurant, now run by the fourth generation of the same family, still serves the same dishes Parker and Natalie ate on their first lunch together, and couples still choose it for anniversary dinners, hoping some of that legendary love will rub off on them. The true measure of Parker and Natalie's love, however, is not in the monuments or the stories or even in the beautiful words Natalie wrote. It is in the family they created, strong and loving and committed to each other. It is in the values they instilled, of hard work and kindness and choosing truth over convenience. It is in the example they set of what partnership really means, of two people who made each other better, stronger, more complete. When the last word of Natalie's manuscript was read, when the final page of Parker's journal was turned, when all the stories had been told and retold, what remained was simple and profound. They loved each other, completely and without reservation, for their entire lives. They built something together that outlasted them both. They proved that love, real love, the kind that shows up every day and does the work, can create miracles. The cowboy who could not read came to a calligrapher for beautiful words and found instead a beautiful life. The calligrapher who had fled from a loveless engagement found a love that transformed everything. Together, they wrote a story not with ink on paper, but with their lives, and it was the most beautiful thing either of them ever created.